I've spent 50 years on Wall Street, and I've never seen anything like this. Goldman Sachs says that AI will create $7 trillion in new wealth, making it more lucrative than the smartphone, the personal computer, and 5G combined. But with all this opportunity comes risk. Just like with the dot-com boom, people will get burned, which is why I'm coming forward today. Today, I want to use my 50-plus years of Wall Street experience to make sure that you're positioned correctly for the AI boom. More than that, I want to show you how to invest in the AI stocks that Wall Street is going all in on, including my #1 personal pick.
Hi, this is Daniela Camboni, and welcome back to the Daniela Camboni Show here on Stansberry Research. We are back from our summer vacation. So good to be here with you all and with my guest today, Andy Schectman. Andy, so good to see you, president and founder of Miles Franklin. How are you doing?
Danielle, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me. I'm great. Hope you are too, and hope you had a great vacation.
Yes, no complaints there. I'm happy to catch up on a variety of topics. I thought we would do a summary of what we saw at the recent BRICS summit. I mean, we know that sanctions imposed by the West and Russia are pushing the BRICS nations closer. This according to executives at the recent annual APEC conference in Singapore. So just curious to get your thoughts on what we saw at that 15th summit that just wrapped in South Africa and the unity and strength of these BRICS nations. I mean, is it something that the U.S. really has to perhaps fear?
Yeah, you know, there's a term called logarithmic decay that I've really been talking a lot about lately. I'm kind of a fan of the image, and it's imagine kind of the Niagara Falls. You're a couple miles upstream, and you start to notice the pitch slowly declining, little by little by little by little. It's like the game of Jenga. Little by little by little by little, and then all at once. And where are we in this graph? Where are we in the logarithmic decay graph? Or how many more blocks need to be pulled out of the game of Jenga before the tower collapses? And so I think it's really important, you know, to realize that this is very substantial. And very, very substantial, but yet it's not something that's going to happen all at once until it does. What I mean by that is this. You know, James Rickards, I know you know James very well, and I had the privilege of talking to him at Rick Rule's conference here a few weeks ago in Boca. And I think the mistake that was made, if any, was that we put dates on it, or James put dates on it, which got everyone excited about a new gold-backed currency coming out August 22nd. And I think he'll be proven right. But it's the timing that's always the tough one to nail down. I mean, as far as the currencies go, look, they said to all of the finance ministers, go back to the drawing board, come back and report to us next year on the merits of having a common settlement currency. To me, it's a done deal. It's just a matter of when it happens. But let's just, you know, look a little bit at what happened during this event. You have, you know, the countries that joined on, you have the majority of the oil across the globe, or at least with OPEC, when you talk about Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. You have the controlling the vast majority of the world's oil under the BRICS influence. When you talk about Argentina, you have the largest producer of natural gas in South America. And, you know, when you talk about Ethiopia, you have the fastest growing economy in Africa. So this is all a process that is very well thought out. And it's one that I think is more methodical than people in the West are accustomed to seeing, where instant gratification perhaps is not fast enough.
You just hit on the main point there. So, you know, like I said, we just saw the summit take place. They, they've now invited the UAE, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, Argentina to join the alliance in 2024. So if I can make the comparison, you know, to a high school cafeteria, right? And it's almost like maybe they weren't the cool kids in class, but now they've all been invited to sit together, and their dominance is growing, and their common denominator is their ample energy resources. So let's talk about the energy dominance that this group can have. So almost more than the currency they're working together, it's the energy dominance.
Absolutely. It's the energy dominance, and it's also the pathways of transportation. With Egypt and Ethiopia, you're controlling the Suez Canal, and you have 75% of the world's manganese, 50% of the world's graphite, 28% of the world's nickel, 10% of the copper. You have the majority of the world's oil production. And, not to mention, you have a long list of natural resources, grains and soybeans and rare earths and uranium and titanium and aluminum and gold. And so this is a growing list of countries that possess what Zoltan Pozsar calls the foundation of Bretton Woods 3, commodities, things that you need in order to develop a war chest. And, when you talk about the transportation, as I mentioned, you have the Straits of Hormuz covered between Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. You have the Suez Canal with Egypt. You have the Straits of Magellan with Argentina, and a very large portion of the Eurasian landmass with Russia, China, and Iran. These are very formidable foes that represent the 5th, the 10th, the 11th, the 18th, and the 23rd largest economies in the world, the 2nd and 3rd largest nuclear arsenals in the world. I mean, go on and on and on. These are not something to take lightly. This is a very formidable alliance that is being built methodically. I do want to mention one thing, and a lot of people push back about, China and India don't like each other, and they've been fighting forever about, Kashmir. And there was an article that I read that really was being ignored by the mainstream, where it came out and said that Xi Jinping and Modi met on the sidelines at the meeting and had agreed to direct the relevant officials to intensify efforts at de-escalation of that area. And to me, when you look at the relationships that are being made for mutual benefit, like, for example, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, rectifying their relationships between Iran and Iraq, rectifying their relationships where there's a railway built between the two countries or embassies built in Saudi Arabia and Iran. My enemy's enemy is my friend. And to think that these things will get in the way of, I think, their one shot at breaking free from the Western hegemony is the Western media looking at this the wrong way. And quite frankly, I think you will start to see these things unfold where these countries come together.
And very valid point, Andy. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them probably don't like each other within the BRICS. Absolutely. But their dislike of America erases all of that, correct?
Absolutely. And look, I think you have to weigh what is the greater cost? What is the greater benefit? And it seems to me that is something that we've seen very consistent. You have China going in and not only brokering peace deals around the world, Daniela, but they're also going into countries and building railways and bridges and maritime channels and gold and silver mines and oil refineries. And they are doing this in a beneficial way where everyone wins, and not to mention a shot at breaking free from this hegemony that's been going on for centuries.
So let's dive a little deeper into this ongoing conversation of U.S. dollar dominance, and does the U.S. really have something to worry about? Because during the summit, Feridun Fishraki, who's the chairman of energy consultancy Fax Global Energy, said, quote, "Nobody can replace the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is very, very powerful. In fact, if any currency was offered to replace the U.S. dollar, the turbulence in the oil prices would be so dramatic, nobody wants it actually." Thoughts on this opposing view to dollar dominance?
Yeah, I think, there is some truth to that. That's why this can't be immediate right now in the sense of cutting off your nose to spite your face. But when you see all of these countries going out of their way to set up trade in local currencies, to trade with one another. For example, you see already Saudi Arabia trading their oil to China for yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. You see France buying oil from or liquid natural gas from the United Arab Emirates, paying in yuan. You're beginning to see this break little by little by little by little, logarithmic decay, little by little by little by little, then all at once. The pieces are being put into place, and that is the thing that I think the West misses more than anything. For whatever reason, the people in the West, and maybe it's because over the last 4 years, we've seen more money created than the history of the country preceding it, and interest rates that were stepped on, creating all of these distortions where asset prices went like that to the moon quickly. Now, Richard Russell, my mentor, always used to say, if you make 6 or 7% per year, you're a rock star. And so a lot of people, I think, have really grown accustomed to instant gratification. And that's not the way that these entities are building what is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And I think they're putting the pieces in place little by little, and you can see it. And at some point, when you continue to see the settlement in other currencies for energy, it will begin to, I believe, erode not only the settlement value of the dollar, but also its reserve status. So this is a deal where he's right until he's not, because they're doing it methodically in the right way, backfilling and building the chessboard in a way that isn't short-sighted. So yes, it is right until it's not.
Let's talk about central bank digital currencies, because the last time you were on, we took a deep dive there. I mean, of the 195 countries in the world, right now, 130 are looking towards building their own central bank digital currency. I want to know your thoughts. I mean, because a lot has happened, like I said, from the last time you were on till now, with the Fed Now program, et cetera, the BRICS launch, talks of launching a competing currency to the US dollar, et cetera. If you have any new thoughts surrounding central bank digital currencies, and also want to add back home in the US that the Federal Reserve's Michael Barr recently said that the central bank is a long way from any decision on whether it would issue its own digital currency. So I guess the first question is, do you believe that?
Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, I do. I think it's coming. I don't think they're a long way. I think it's coming. I mean, the BIS said that by 2025, everyone needs to have an operational CBDC. And if you look at if you take the entire gross domestic product of the world, the countries that comprise, to your point, 95% of the GDP globally already have one that in production, or they are beta testing, or they are building the central bank digital currency. I think it's interesting to note that the number 2 financial or economic advisor to the Biden administration, Lael Brainerd, who spent time at the Treasury and the Fed, who ran point on Fed Now, is a modern monetary theorist. She was involved in dealing, when at the Fed, dealing with MIT in the production of the CBDC. Biden signed an executive order to fast track the CBDC. And, so yes, I do think ultimately that it is coming. And this is what has kind of led me down this pathway that I think I'm a little bit I almost have to stop myself, because I have been saying things that I don't normally say. I mean, I guess, let me indulge me, if you will.
Please, yeah.
So let's take a step back. When we talk about the things that the U.S. has done, and I'll get to this point because I think it bears at least thought process for people out there. I am not a conspiratorialist at all. I think I'm a realist. I try to look at both sides of the equation. But let's look at 2 things, and 2 people in particular. Number 1 is Jared Bernstein. He's the lead economic advisor to the U.S. administration, to the Biden administration. His topic of his thesis that has gained him, I guess, a lot of pushback is for the U.S. to shed its world reserve status. He's written reports that were picked up in the New York Times and the Washington Post, the most famous being Dethrone King Dollar, for where he advocates the U.S. should immediately shed its reserve status. That the privilege of having it is one we can no longer afford. If I wanted to get rid of the world reserve status, the first thing I would do would be to weaponize the dollar, to push Russia out of SWIFT, to confiscate their assets, to not just sanction them, but to confiscate them and use them, tell them that we are using them to rebuild the Ukraine. And then at the exact same time, I would push away what is the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, and that is the petrodollar, Saudi Arabia. And we signed another executive order saying by 2030 we'll be 50% green, and by 2050 nearly 80% green. In essence, we're telling Saudi Arabia, hey, we don't need you anymore. Those two things in particular would be the very first two things I would do to lose the world reserve status. And then if I look at the number two in charge, Lael Brainerd, who is a modern monetary theorist, you look at the things that are being done in this country, and you have to wonder to yourself, why are they doing these things? Why are we mothballing all of our energy? Why does, and this is not a political statement, but why are people looking at what made this country great, liberty and justice for all, where people would tie inner tubes together with string and float from Cuba, or walk from Central America, across, God knows what, and how hot it was, and all of the perils to find liberty and justice. And people look at what's happening in this country, and I think they have to question, is justice being passed out equally? Is it being administered equally? Are we the country that we once were? The fraying of the unity of this country, where, after World War II and the Great Depression, we were a unified country. We were able to stand together and build a great country. We're not unified anymore. It's black and white and red and blue and vax and no vax and rich and poor, and we're very, very much just not the same country we once were. Now, what I'm getting at is simply this. I ask you, could this possibly be intended? Could they possibly be trying to create an event? And this is what I've talked about for a very long time without really saying it. When we push away Saudi Arabia, we create divisiveness in this country, we weaponize the dollar, we're doing everything we can to create an environment where you see this coalition of countries pushing back against the West, even our allies like France, pushing back, and all of a sudden sides are being drawn. And what happens? What happens if Saudi Arabia and OPEC at that moment say we're no longer taking dollars and the dollar gets dumped? The banking system, remember, Lael Brainerd is a modern monetary theorist who wants to get rid of the banks, wants to cull them. Look at what's happening with the banks. The aiding and abetting of the money leaving the regional banks to the big commercial banks by the Fed, because they're allowing the money market funds to invest in the overnight reverse repo market at 5.3% with daily liquidity. There's no reason to stay in these fractured regional banks. You see this event, or whatever event it is, that creates this chaos where the banks fail and they will be bailed in, not bailed out. Bailed in. That's what the Dodd-Frank law said. They must be bailed in. Everyone will lose everything over $250,000. It goes into the pot to bail in the bank. The dollar gets dumped globally because it's no longer the sole settlement currency for oil. At some point, that's that all-at-once moment. You go over the falls, or the Jenga tower falls. Hey, thanks. You guys are going green. You signed an executive order. You don't need us anymore. So we've signed up with the BRICS, and we're going to sell oil and other currencies, and the dollar gets dumped globally, because every country's had to hold it for 50 years to buy oil, and now it creates a tsunami of inflation. Interest rates spike, the banks collapse, everything collapses. Why? Because how the hell else, Daniela, do you get everyone who watches your show who said, I'm not taking a CBDC, not a chance in hell? Well, guess what? The $155 trillion in debt that the U.S. has, $32 trillion on balance sheet, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions, $120 trillion, that's owed to the American public, mostly. And as China and Japan and Saudi Arabia dump treasuries, who's buying them all? The American public. So if you create an event, purposely, knowingly, you push away Saudi Arabia, you create this event where the dollar, we're not clinging to the privilege of the world reserve currency, just like the number one economic advisor in this country would like. Instead, we are incentivizing de-dollarization, and ultimately that moment where there's an event created, where, by the government's own admission, we have 5 trillion in assets backing 155 trillion in debt, the largest asset, 40% of our assets are student debt. What I'm getting at is you create an event because you'll never pay that debt off, ever. There's no way you can pay that off without completely getting rid of entitlements and stop spending and do all of these things that won't work in this country. So you create an event, you have a villain, Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC. How could they have done this to us? They dumped the dollars, look what they've done, and bang, everything collapses. And everything collapses at the exact same time. Stocks, bonds, real estate, the dollar, pensions, 401ks, the banks, everything. But have no fear, because Lael Brainerd is here, and she's a modern monetary theorist who ran Point for Fed now, has been dealing with the CBDC with MIT, and all you need to do is sign on the dotted line and we'll make you whole. In other words, what I'm getting at is, could this have all been thought out? How else do you reset? How else do you find a villain to blame for the collapsing of the system that allows you to default and start over and allows the American people to be made whole by signing on to a modern monetary theorist's dream of a central bank digital currency? Sign on the dotted line, we make you whole. So I guess all I'm saying is this. I do believe it's going to happen. And I think there'll be a tremendous amount of pushback for those who would otherwise willingly take it. But what if there was an event that put everyone at the same place where you have no choice to take it or to be broke, to be busted, to be screwed? So yeah, I think there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality, and I check myself when I say this, but the more I think about it, and the more you look at the two people who are the number 1 and 2 advisors to this country, one wants to get rid of the banks and go modern monetary theory, central bank currency, and one wants to shed the world reserve currency. You couldn't draw it up any better in a Hollywood script to what's happening if that's indeed what you wanted to do.
Oh. Andy, I want to thank you. I really want to thank you for that, for that incredible summation of helping us connect the dots. And of course, you and I, we don't know the answer, but it's so important, I believe, to think about this, because my concern, Andy, when I speak to people who are not watching this show or other shows like this, is that I'm so afraid they're just going to sign on that dotted line, that they're not thinking about this, right? And unfortunately, I believe that is the majority. And I know it takes a minority to make a change, but unfortunately, I don't know if the majority are thinking about this, Andy.
Well, and I think most people wouldn't want to take it because of the perception of erosion of privacy and all of these things. You take a look at all the patents Bill Gates has and all the big money that's developed programs that, like the ID 2020, where this enhanced ID, where Bill Gates has patents that connect your medical records and your ability to your bank records to this ID. I mean, all of these things are put into place, and you can see little by little how these things are happening. And, I guess I've learned one thing, Daniela, over the years, that there is a fine line between conspiracy and reality. I would get up on stage at the Agora Summit and I would say JP Morgan and the commercial banks are manipulating the price of gold. And I remember Doug Casey got up right after me one day and said, well, these things probably aren't happening because the traders at JP Morgan couldn't keep their mouth shut. And then here we find out a year or two ago that JP Morgan indeed did manipulate the market, paid the Treasury Department, Justice Department a $920 million fine, and their head trader and the guy that ran the metals desk was just sentenced to jail a couple weeks ago. And so I think most of us have a hard time believing, could these things really be intended? But ask yourself, how do you pay off $155 trillion in debt? Daniela, a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago.
I know. It's mind-boggling. Well, that's why you need higher inflation.
Right.
Okay?
Well, that's exactly right. And what better way to get real inflation than to see the world dump dollars? And the better part about it, and when this all came to me, is when Biden said it's Putin's inflation. No, it's not. Inflation is always a monetary event. It is an increase in the money supply. And more money was printed in 4 years than in the history of the country preceding it, while stepping on interest rates, creating the distortions.
Yeah.
So when he said it's Putin's inflation, I said they're looking for a villain. So what better way to reset the system than to tell Saudi Arabia we don't need you anymore, and to weaponize the dollar, making everyone think, are we next? and allowing this formation of countries that is incredibly formidable, that controls the majority of all of the commodities in the world. And when they say we're going a different direction and everything collapses because everyone who's had to, in the whole world, they've all had to stockpile dollars to buy oil. If they dump dollars simultaneously at some point, and not too soon to cut off their nose to spite their face, as we talked about a few minutes ago, but now you have a villain. And that villain did this to us, a rallying cry for everyone who just got whacked to sign on to the new system, the new CBDC. Here's your great reset. And could it be? I don't know. But think about it for a moment, and I think it starts to become plausible. And I don't see any other explanation other than our politicians are completely idiotic. And maybe that's the truth. Maybe they just don't see beyond their own face. But as far as I'm concerned, either they're completely nefarious and plotting, or they're just stupid, one or the other.
Or and I know if I bring this up, it's a different conversation, or the counter argument is, they're just puppets and not the real puppeteers.
Of course,
right?
But what do the puppeteers want? Do the puppeteers want to reset the system? When you realize we only have $5 trillion in assets and we call 40% of our assets student debt, are we really, and a country that is very divisive, that is not unified, that the world looks at, one last thing, they talk about what makes the dollar the dollar. Well, you got three things. You got the petrodollar, we just talked about that, and then you got the full faith and credit. Well, how about the credit? 155 trillion in debt, 5 trillion in assets, of which 40% is student debt. We're 125% debt to GDP. We're a banana republic, but we don't jail our political oppressors, right? So, are we really the land of the free? What's the other piece? The Lady Liberty holding the scales of justice. And this is not political. I am a libertarian. I'm patriot. Does everyone really truly believe that the justice system is being administered equally between the previous and the past administrations? This is not a comment on being a Democrat or a Republican. I am neither. I think they're both idiots. But the point of it is that what made this country special? People say, well, the bond market is the most trusted in the world. Sure it is, the most liquid and trusted. But is it? Are we? Are we really trusted as we once were? People don't trust China, but do people trust us? And that's what distributed ledger technology and gold, blockchain and gold and commodities and immutability will do to this new system. And to your point earlier, that's why Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, came out and said a CBDC that is not backed by something is just a fiat currency. And what did the IMF say 6 months ago, 8 months ago? They said a report, gold as an international reserve, comma, a barbarous relic no more, question mark. You even see the IMF in the West starting to acknowledge that if you're going to do something this time, next time, it better be back to something, because politicians will do what politicians have done since way back when, the Roman times, when they clipped the edges of coins, and that's why you have ridges on them now, so you can't do that. But anyways, they'll choose inflation over the tough decisions, as they always do.
We're just scratching the surface here. And I just want to say, what a resounding way to be back in studio here with you, Andy. I want to wrap, you mentioned gold. Look, it hasn't done much, right? Let's be honest, hasn't done much this summer, paling in comparison when comparing it to the S&P, to the NASDAQ. When you have risk-free assets such as treasuries with a 6-month yield north of 5.5%, it makes the case to buy gold right now tough?
No, it doesn't. It does in this country because we're blinded by the inordinate, stupid strength of the dollar. Last Monday, gold hit all-time highs in the second and third largest economies in the world, in China and Japan. And there's a chart that I would like people to pull up, and you put down $ in front of XAUWCU. This is a chart of the 20 largest economies in the world. And if you look, this year alone, gold is up 9.5%, and over the last 5 years, it's up 59.65% against the 20 largest economies in the world. Gold is doing what it's supposed to do. Everywhere in the world except in this country. And ask yourself, how the hell is the dollar so strong when it is $155 trillion in debt with $5 trillion in assets, the largest asset being student debt? And we are divisive and we are destroying the world reserve status and our image on the world stage.
Is
it justified?
Is gold lower than where it should be because countries are needing to buy gold?
Gold is lower than it should be because the Western system has suppressed the price of gold for a very long time in order to support a bond market and a Western system that is perceived to be stronger than it really is. Gold is the antithesis of the Western system. And I think the central banks for a very long time, because of low interest rate policy, have suppressed gold. And now the difference is you have the sovereign nations standing on the sidelines with their hands open. Okay, suppress it. We'll stand for delivery. And they are taking delivery and draining the exchanges very methodically. Here again, you'll notice we do things like that. They do it slowly, methodically, plotting. Don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Stand for delivery. Suppress the price. Let the West suppress the price. Don't bitch about it. Let those two guys from JP Morgan go to jail. Don't bitch about it because we're accumulating at pennies on the dollar. Subsidy. Thank you. And then once no one wants to sell at this make-believe price, you'll see exchanges around the world take over for the COMEX or the LBMA, like the Moscow exchange or the Shanghai exchange, where it will be priced appropriately. Instead of the futures controlling the price, it will be the commodity controlling the price because they will have not only accumulated it all, they produce it all. So yes, to your point in the United States with 5%, 5.5% interest on a treasury, which is still basically, if you look at the CPI, even today, by their own admission, the month over month puts us at over 7% inflation. So you're still real negative by 2%.
Right.
But look at what John Williams would tell you. You're probably 5, 6, 7% real negative. But yes, 5.5% ain't so bad when you look at a non-interest bearing asset like gold. It makes it tougher. Here in the States, it does.
Thank you. Andy Schectman, I always appreciate your insights. Thank you for joining me here today.
Danielle, I appreciate it. I hope you don't mind the fact that I kind of dove off into a land, in the gray area. And I realize that. I understand that things I'm talking about here are slightly conspiratorial, but I think about this all day, every day, and I can't help but coming back to, could this have all been by design?
I feel it. No, Andy, look, I let you talk, right? Because I think it's so important that people hear things that you're not going to hear on mainstream media. So I thank you, and this is why I love doing this show. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Daniela, and it's an honor to be here, and I hope to come back again soon. In the meantime, I hope you and everyone out there stays well.
Absolutely, and thank you all for watching. So good to be back in studio this week. Happy weekend, and we'll see you next week, folks.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.